Hi and good morning and welcome to the London Growth Hub webinar on adapting communications to retain customers. I hope that you're going to enjoy the next few hours. So if we can go to the next slide, we can take it from here. The objective for today is very simple and straightforward, and that's to provide you with real help so your business can grow. Hopefully there'll be lots and lots of different ideas and tips and information which will really be able to help you in a very practical and meaningful way as soon as the webinar is over, and hopefully even during the webinar. But that's really the objective for today. Next slide. So taking you through the formal agenda, and you probably saw this on the emails and on the webpage when you registered, really taking you through in order what we're going to try and do today is understanding your customers' current wants and needs. Obviously for each of your businesses that's going to be different, but we're going to talk through a little bit about what we mean by our customers, what do we mean by their wants and needs, and probably more importantly the shifts and changes that are happening in the market, some of which you're very aware of and are extremely obvious and you are obviously currently grappling with right now. We're then going to move to how to keep your customers engaged, which obviously is very important. And then talk a little bit about the communications requirements as far as that's concerned. Moving from that point, we're going to move to the whole action phase, which is how to actually draw up a proper action plan to help you interact with your audience. So the idea being is it's going to be very practical and very applicable. And then we're moving down to the actual tools and tactics which you can actually do to help reach your audience. That's both obviously current audience and I guess hopefully audiences or customers that aren't your customers at the moment. And then obviously the key point on that point is building loyalty to your brand and your business. The important point to make on this one is that Q&As are there to be asked during the session. The more interactive we can make it, clearly the fact that we're on video does present a challenge in terms of it's different from when we're in person, but the fact that we're over the video, it shouldn't really change anything in terms of being able to ask questions or asking assistance. Any chats, any questions you have, it's important that those get fed through so that they can be dealt with either at the time or as we go through. Next slide, please. So a little bit of housekeeping. I'm hoping that you can hear me and you can see me okay. If that is the case, can you please type yes in the chat box? You should have at the bottom of your control panel to the right of your screen. So if you just type it in, then that should be okay. Okay. I'm presuming that's okay. That's all right. Yeah, okay. So if anybody's having any technical issues, if you post a private message in the chat, the Innumerable team will respond. If you can see to the left of my screen, you can it's that little drop-down box. You can see where you send that to, and if you go to the London Growth Hub events and just message them privately, that will enable you to get any support that you might require technically. Okay. So this webinar is actually going to be recorded and sent to you along with the slides within 24 hours. So that way, if there's anything you've missed as we're going through it, you can quickly refer back to it either in audio form or obviously on the slide side of things. And as I've mentioned before, any comments or questions you've got, please put them in the chat box. And what we'll try and do is refer to it and deal with it either immediately if it's directly relevant to the content that's just been covered, or if it's just something else that's popped into your head, it's a triggered an idea as we've gone through, then we will deal with that at the appropriate time. And if it's slightly more in depth and needs to be dealt with offline or outside the context of the webinar, I'm sure we can follow up and sort that one through. And if you don't want your comments to be read publicly, do make sure that you find the private person. So if I just take you to the screen here, you can see you can actually just specify if you want to send a message specifically to that person rather than to everybody publicly. Okay, and there will be a break to grab a coffee. We're not going to run straight the way through without any breaks. So that way it'll try and mimic the feel of something in person. Okay, but obviously when we get to it, we'll give you the indication of the timings. And clearly, if you stay logged on, but just clearly mute yourself and mute your webcam as well, then obviously you can get back to it at the appropriate time. Okay, so hopefully that should all be fairly clear. I don't have to give any indications of if there are any fire exits, because you're at home or a location that you know well, so you know all those key issues. Okay, on to the next slide. So I'm going to dive into a little bit more the specific agenda. We'll catch up accordingly in terms of timings, but just to kind of give you a flavour of how we're going to take this, we're going to give you a proper overview of the London Growth Hub. Well, Martha's going to do so. I'm then going to take you through the key points. We're going to start in terms of understanding the current customers and the shifts and changes in the market. We'll then get to the point about keeping your customers engaged and the way in which we communicate, and we'll then aim to head for the break for about 11:15. So it's about an hour from now. That's the general idea. We'll have a 15-minute break, so you can obviously check up on, stretch your legs, grab a coffee, check for some quick emails, and then for the last part of the session, the last hour and a half, we're going to dive into the whole issues of planning and implementation and measurement and building brand loyalty. I've put a placeholder in there for some formal Q&A. Obviously, Q&A throughout is really what we're aiming for. But clearly, as you go, we will have some designated time if needs be for some more in depth. And the idea being is that we should finish for around about 1 o'clock. I've actually been a little bit remiss. I haven't actually introduced myself as being Mark Duke. I'm obviously going to present the rest of the details. But when we start, I'll give you a little bit why as to why I'm giving the presentation. But I guess at this point, it's appropriate for me to hand across to Marta Queiroz to take us further in terms of the London Growth Hub. Onto the next slide.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning in the second webinar of the series London Growth Hub COVID-19 Business Hub series. My name is Marta Queiroz. I'm the program manager for the London Growth Hub Business Support Program, which is a pan-London program that supports day-to-day businesses and is part funded by the European Regional Development Fund. The next slide, please. Okay. The purpose of the program, or the goal of the program, is to help everyday businesses to grow and unlock their potential. And the program runs from November 2019 to January 2022, and we are located in 5 different hubs, which obviously we cannot use now during COVID, but we will go back to them pretty soon, hopefully. And in those hubs, you can meet your dedicated advisor. I will introduce them in the next slide. But where you can meet them and have your one-to-one interview, one-to-one advice and support for all the help you need for your company. So the program is based in three pillars. The one-to-one advice support provided by our team of expert advisors, and consists in up to 12 hours of continuous support. Then we have this series of workshops, so in this case webinars, that we have been developed since February, and they will continue throughout all the program in different topics that might be of need for all of you. And then we have the London Business Accelerator program, which is a specific program for 20 high growth potential companies that have been selected already for an intensive 3-month period program. The first cohort has already been selected, and they are starting the program right now. And but if you find it interesting and you think you you can be eligible. Please follow our further kind of announcement for the following cohorts that we will have throughout this 2-year 2-year period. So as long as you are based in one of the 33 boroughs of London and you are a registered SME, you are eligible for this program. So please let us know in the feedback if you want to be put in contact with our advisors, and so we make that happen. So next slide, please. Well, this is how the program looks like a little bit. I already explained the different kind of steps and the different pillars of the program. So the one-to-one advice support, the business accelerator, and the series of workshops, webinars, and events. So next slide, please. If you go to the website of the London Growth Hub, this is what you're gonna see. This is how it looks like. So if you click there and get support, this is where you go to meet and to book a meeting with our advisor. Next slide, please. This is the link. This is the email, the address where you can find us. And as I mentioned, the London Growth Hub is funded by the European Regional Development Fund, and it's for UK registered SMEs based in any of the 33 boroughs of London. So next slide, please. So this is what you're gonna see. That's why I put this slide here when you check into this webpage. And if you scroll down, you will see the part at the bottom when you say book an appointment. And if you do that, next slide, please. You will reach a page where you can meet with one of our dedicated advisors. Here, our experienced line of advisors have been helping us since the program started in November. But all of them have decades of experience helping SMEs as mentors, as business advisors, and managing their own businesses. So please use this support because it's free of charge, and that will help you navigate the situation your company might be facing, especially now with COVID. So just leave us your feedback in the feedback form, and your interest in contact them, and we'll make that happen. That's all from my part. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to leave you with Mark, who's going to guide you through this interesting topic about team communications to retain customers. And I think it's a special topic that's very, very useful in the times we are living right now. So thank you, and I leave the floor to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Marta. Much appreciated. So hopefully you'll be able to see the slide in front of you of the lead slide. So let me just give you a little bit about me as to why it is that I'm actually giving this presentation. So I have about 20 years of marketing communications experience, primarily on the B2B side, but have done some B2C work, and that's all elements on the marketing side of things, from the planning, the strategy to implementation. And I've also worked with a whole range of businesses, from very small founder companies up to very large corporates. So I have a lot of experience across a lot of different businesses in the area of marketing. So the whole issue of adaptive communications to retain customers is extremely important, and has been really kind of the backbone of all the different things I've done. So the idea behind the slides that you're going to get today is that this is really a quick run through of probably quite a few things that you're pretty aware of, and some things that you may not have considered, but with a very strong bias of actions that you can do here and now, as soon as you've logged off the webinar. So I'm hoping there'll be 2 or 3 things specifically that you'll do this afternoon, thanks to this morning. So what I'm going to start with is a few obvious things that you're very aware of and that you're very mindful of, but need to be mentioned, because sometimes the obvious things are so obvious that we actually look past them, and occasionally you need somebody external to say, well, haven't you missed this? Well, the one thing that you obviously haven't missed, or anybody's missed, unless, well, I always say, even if you were living in a cave, or even if you were in a boat, clearly we are all grappling with COVID. We've all got our own personal stories, experiences, challenges that we've gone through on a personal and familial level. from a business perspective, we are, as we all know, in completely unprecedented times. I don't really want to focus on this excessively. Suffice to say that the key thing to deal with unprecedented times is to try and have a plan of action in terms of to try and navigate our way through it, so that things become more regular or normal or new normal, depending on what you want to, how you wish to phrase it. But that's obviously stating the obvious. The next stating the obvious, given that this is all to do with customer retention, is that in our business, the customer is king. Of course, if you said to anybody running their business, how important are customers to you? They'll say, yes, our customers are absolutely vital. That's an absolute given. The extent to which businesses actually function in that way does actually vary. Some of the businesses I've worked with historically have been a little bit too internally focused and not thinking enough about their customers. We can always think more about our customers. It's obviously something that you're doing an awful lot of now, and have been and will continue to do so. But I'm working on the assumption that for everybody that's logged in today, the customer is king, and that's really the key thing. But you're aware of that, but it's worth stating it at the outset before we go further. The next thing to state as we go through, which again is pretty obvious, is that every customer is an individual. Every customer is different. We're going to talk about segments in a little bit more detail now, but the fact is no two customers are the same. They may have very similar preferences, they may have similar attributes, they may have very similar forms of behavior, but everyone is an individual. That again is obvious, but sometimes we don't always remember that. And as we get to tone a little bit later on in the presentation, you're going to see why that becomes extremely important. These are obvious points, but it's worth mentioning them nonetheless. Okay, so as this is online and it's a little bit tricky in terms of to make it interactive, I'm very conscious of the fact that the way this is set up, I'm talking and you're listening. Okay, that's great for me, but for you that may not necessarily be as engaging as if we were face-to-face around a table. So what I've decided to do across the presentation today is there are going to be a number of different activities for you to do. The activities are really focused around helping you. You may already have this done already, you may not. If you have it already, then that's great. So please message me privately with the details. If you don't, then I think this is a really good exercise. So what I'd like you to do in about a minute, and I'm actually going to set the timer on my clock here to give you a full 60 seconds to do this, although you've probably been doing it while I've been talking to set the slide up, but nonetheless it's worth taking the time, either on a Word document if you have it on your computer, or if you've got pen and paper, slightly old school, hence the graphic. Write down what you see as being your 5 key custom segments, and your time starts now. Ten seconds. So I'm hoping that by now you have that list and you've got that to hand. Keep that with you because we're going to need that as we go further along. So you'll probably notice that in terms of your segmentation as you were going through this exercise, some of your customers were segmented by location. So by that, where they live, where they're based. That could be by street, that could be by borough, that could be by area, by region. You may have segmented them by customer. That could be in terms of different age brackets. You could also have segmented them by usage in terms of Do they use your product a lot or a little? Do they use your service a lot or a little? Likewise, fairly obviously, you might have done so by spend, in terms of how much they're spending with you. In terms of the customer age, I meant in terms of how long they've been a customer for you. They may have been a customer with you for years, maybe for days, maybe for months, maybe for weeks. Clearly, the more loyal they are, the more valuable they've been to you as far as the customer has been in terms of the lifetime value of a customer, which you can measure. And then obviously in terms of revenue, you may have bucketed a group of your customers depending on how much they've spent over the last 3 months, 6 months. That means that group of customers. Clearly, you've got different ways in which you can segment. You could also segment in terms of customer behavior, in terms of whether they are online or offline, whether they use different channels to connect to you. That's really entirely up to you in terms of the basis on which you did that. That's going to become significant to us because you need to communicate to different customer segments in different ways. That's fairly obvious, but if you go through the exercise of actually segmenting them in the first instant, that's a very good place to start. And obviously, by your customer segment, there are some internal considerations. By internal considerations, I mean there are things within your business that you also need to make sure that you've got set up. Your customers are external to your business, obviously, so they are, the outside world, as it were, directly. But there are some internal considerations that you need to consider within your business. So your product and service types. What products or services are you offering? There may be different things that you're offering. There might be the same things that you're offering. It depends. This becomes an issue where you've got different customers that have got different products. So you have the opportunity in certain instances to cross-sell or upsell, as the phrase is used. But again, that depends on what your business is about. Data and systems. This is really significant and is becoming more and more significant the more digital and online our world becomes. And clearly, with the situation that we're in at the moment, we are having to radically rethink the offline or physical activities and obviously amend them to a virtual one. Clearly, this is a great case in point, but you therefore need to have systems within your business in place, be that website, be that email, be that broadband connectivity, be that mobile connectivity in place to make sure that you can engage with your customers in an effective way. And then there is the whole issue of data. We're going to get to this a little bit more later on, but the fact is there is a lot of information within your business about your customers, about what their behavior is, about what they're doing. And that data needs to be properly held. There are obviously some regulatory issues in terms of things such as GDPR and privacy and consent and compliance. But that aside, it's important in terms of the data that you have on your customers and there's different segments. Then in terms of people, by people I mean which of the people within your business are customer facing. There may be certain people within your business that are the technical people, they are the production people, they are the non-customer facing people. Okay, that's fine, but then which people are dealing with your customers? And are they all dealing with your customers in a consistent and fair way? And then obviously there is the issue of processes. So how do we deal with processes as far as our customers are concerned? So for example, and this is I'm sure this is an issue that you've all faced in terms of, I know I certainly have, in terms of issues such as refunds, for example, or issues such as deferring a booking for something. What processes have you got in place? I've noticed, as I'm sure you probably have, of lots of businesses who at the moment, I can't pick up the phone to speak to them because they'll tell me that calls are being prioritized to key workers, which is absolutely fine, but they're giving me an alternative way in which how I can communicate with their business. Clearly, they've created a process for which that can happen. Clearly, you need to have all these different processes mapped out and worked out, so that way you can deal effectively with your customers. It's an obvious thing, but sometimes we don't always think these things through. And in some instances, it might be a case of that you're dealing with all of these different issues yourself, which is fine, but it's about having a process because the consistency of process is really important as far as the customer is concerned, because ultimately that's going to impact on loyalty. which we'll get to a little bit later on. But those are the internal considerations. If we talk in terms of customer needs and wants, what do my customers need and what do my customers want? Those of you who have come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I put this down because it's fairly obvious and fairly, I guess, maturing theory of why it is that people, what is it the needs and wants that people actually want in terms of why they're going to engage with a business. Is it based on their psychological needs or their safety and security, or more importantly in terms of their self-esteem, or as the top one, their self-actualization? I think the important thing here behind me putting this on is just to think in terms of put yourself in the head of the customer. That's not always an easy thing to do because you're so close to your business, you care so much about your business, you care so much about what it is that you're delivering for your business. But having that in mind is really significant, because that will then really tailor how you communicate with your customer, how you handle your customers, and that way how you delight your customers ultimately. Okay, so when we talk about needs and wants, we obviously put the theoretical one. If we sort of stand back for a second and think, okay, well, why is it that customers come to my business? Why is it that they buy from me? Why is it that they want to spend money with me? Well, there are a whole range of needs. I've put some down here because hopefully some of these are going to start to resonate with you, and you're just going to go, yeah, that's pretty obvious. So, for example, your product or your service, it solves a problem that they may have. So, for example, right now, my garden's looking a bit sparse, so I have a problem that my garden is looking sparse. I therefore need to get some plants for it. So therefore, I go online, I find some plants that I like the look of, and lo and behold, I've solved the problem of having a garden that doesn't look as nice as I would like it to look. That's fairly obvious, but if you look at what you're doing, that's the problem you're trying to solve for your customer. And then you've obviously got the other issue of something that's going to save me time, so I can wind up doing something slightly faster, or something that might save me money in terms of that my solution winds up being more cost effective. Now, you can obviously think of, in terms of saving time, you know, using a takeaway service is a classic example. You're saving me the time of having to cook supper myself, or obviously switching gas and electricity providers is a fairly obvious example where people are going to wind up saving money. But the interesting thing is, when we're talking on a business-to-business context here, when we're talking about saving time and money, that really, really matters to the bottom line. When we're talking about saving time, that's an issue of I'm going to wind up being able to do other things in my business more effectively because the solution that you have for me is much easier. And that can be very significant, particularly when some of the companies I've worked with in the past, I've said to them, well, look, how much time are you saving your customer by this particular automation system? Can you talk me through it? Can you estimate how much time that is? And obviously the phrase of, you know, time is money, you can convert that in terms of how much you're going to potentially save that business. But not only that, you then get into conversations where you're showing people what value you're offering them. And that is a really, really significant issue, because value is a very significant thing as far as the customer is concerned. There are issues where people just want to follow the latest trend. I want the latest. Could it be iPhone? Could it be handbag? Could it be video conferencing solution? Whatever it may be. So therefore, if that's why customers are buying things, you need to recognize that and you need to see that. An example, somebody within my network runs a print work, and historically their business has been about providing signage and material for people running events. Right now, that's not an option because of the situation that we're in. However, there is a need for businesses to have signage in terms of social distancing and to make people aware so they can comply with the government regulations. I guess it's the next point, but I'll talk to that in more detail. I wouldn't say that's more than the trend, but it's being able to see what that trend is and being aware of that, and obviously adapting to that, because that's why customers are buying something. And if they have a relationship with you already, they'll be happier to buy that from you. The next one is complying with regulations. A great example of this. My other half happens to be an accountant. And probably the best example of this is the government stipulation of the fact that people should be filing their VAT returns online. That in itself necessitates the need for you to have some form of software that enables you to do that. So whilst I wouldn't necessarily have run out and gone to buy an accountancy package that enables me to submit my VAT returns online, because that's the regulations, that's where I've gone. And clearly, obviously, in the COVID environment that we're in today, I don't need to talk to you about regulations as far as that's concerned, because I'm sure that's one of the issues that you're grappling with. There is another point, and that's about pain. Often customers are in a situation where they need it's more than solving a problem. There's a real pain within their business. So if we take the co-working situation at the moment, there's a real issue in terms of how do we get everybody within the team connected, able to communicate effectively with each other, able to work as efficiently as possible. So often a custom purchase will be driven by the fact that they would like the pain to be removed. And then the last one is the no more pressure. The idea being is that sometimes within a business, you may be getting pressure from other people within the business to get the problem sorted. So the purchase that you then make means you can keep your boss happy, or if it's on a consumer side of things, you might be able to keep people that are nagging you. That nag then gets removed. But the point is obvious, that your customers are going to have different needs and wants that you're going to be able to solve. The key thing is to be able to understand what it is you're offering to them. So many businesses that I work with, particularly on the communication side, are so quick to talk to me about the benefits and the features and what their products can do, rather than actually stepping back and thinking about, well, what problem are they solving? How are they meeting their customers' needs? Okay, so we've got to the point now where it's back to your Word document and or your pen and paper. We're going to need a little bit more time here because we need to think a little bit more based on what we've said about customer needs and wants. You went through the exercise of drawing out what your customer segments were. So what I'd now like you to do, and you've got a little bit more time on the clock to get this done, is to actually write down the following. I put, our customers are looking for. So when you think about what it is they're looking for, actually write that out. Write down what it is. So you could do it by the different custom segments that you drew up, and then start to actually define what that is. I'm going to start the clock, and we've got 90 seconds on this one. If you prefer to message me directly in the time, then that's great, but I'm going to start the clock now. Okay, 15 seconds. And time is up. So I'm hoping that was of use for you. I mean, I realize it's a little tricky when we're not face to face, but the real idea is to kind of get you thinking through these things. That's probably the most important thing. Okay, but we know for those of you that are Bob Dylan fans, times are changing. We're abundantly aware of this, and I think sometimes we don't always appreciate the extent to which things are moving through. And I think it's worth looking at a few of the things, how things have changed and how that impacts the business as far as that's concerned. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a few of the things that are fairly obvious, but that's going to impact as far as interacting with the customer is concerned. I like to use graphics on these things just because it makes for more interesting viewing, in my opinion. So if I take you through where we're at, yeah, you know, there are some people that still use the phone, even though as in landlines, but historically everything's moved across to mobile, as we're probably fairly aware. And whereas at the bottom of your screen, it used to be websites, and it used to be having a web page, and that was enough. In certain instances, it isn't anymore. It's about apps, and it's about having apps on phones. It used to be about being in a shop, whereas, as I'm sure all of you are, have attested, well, some shops are still closed, and those that are not closed, the customer retail experience is very, very, very different from what it used to be. And whereas before things used to be about just phoning up a customer agent, we're now looking at things like bots and automated responses to inquiries when people come onto a website. All of these things are fairly obvious changes that you're pretty familiar with, but it's worth bearing in mind that impacts how your customers interact with you and how they can. The not so obvious changes, and I have to tell you, this is something that I've noticed particularly where we are right now. Everybody is living with uncertainty. When we are living with uncertainty, that therefore means it's very, very difficult to make decisions, because often decisions are going to be made on certainty. And when you don't know what's going to happen, it's very difficult to make that decision. So therefore, I personally am seeing a lot more of businesses trying to be much, much, much more flexible in terms of the way in which they engage with customers from a perspective of free trials. So whilst you might not be prepared to commit to something right now, why don't you try it for free? So that way your commitment level isn't as great. The idea being is that when you've got to the end of your free trial, you'll then love it so much that you'll want to carry on. You may find that slightly more discerning customers are just happy to use the free trial. What that means is that you need to plan for that accordingly and work that through and say, okay, well, look, if I've got 30 people on a free trial, how many of those people on a free trial, firstly, how much is that costing me, because they're not paying for it? And secondly, how many of those are going to convert? The next phenomenon is, as I'm sure you're probably more than familiar from the mobile phone folk, is that pay as you go, i.e. I will pay for what I use. Again, that lowers the barrier for customers to be involved, but in terms of your revenue, that clearly has an impact. The next point is about subscriptions. I'm sure there are many a business, mostly as we would describe it in the business-to-business technology world of the SaaS, software as a service type business, where what you're paying for is a monthly subscription. Again, gives you the flexibility to stop it month by month if you don't have the money for it, but also it makes the commitment feel it's less of a strong tie-in. And then there's also the issue of self-servicing, of how many times where rather than someone coming around, because obviously they can't given the situation that we're in, you'll implement such a solution yourself. You'll download the software, you'll get the box sent to you in the post. And the trend that we're moving away from is the very long and lengthy contracts. And the truth is that this is happening as much on the business to consumer space. This is happening on the business to business space. And these are issues that all of us are exposed to and are facing, but thinking in terms of your customers, these may be options that some of your customers that wish to move away may be tempted to kind of come back on board and may be tempted to stay with you just a little bit longer. So they're not so obvious changes that are happening, but it's worth to be mindful of those things as we go through. But the truth is, the real questions that you have to ask yourself, which I'm sure you've probably been doing already. I mean, look, we've been in lockdown for long enough, but the real question is has your customer really changed? Now, there may be certain businesses where they are really challenged. Perhaps an example to share with you is my dentist. I can't go and see my dentist. Fortunately, I don't have toothache, so I don't need to see my dentist. But the point is, my dentist has a massive problem. He has a great business. He's a great dentist. He's looked after me and my family really well. The problem is that I can't see him. So that has a real issue in terms of how he deals with his customers, and I'll probably come back to that later. In terms of the channels to engage with your customer, I mean, I guess with the dentist example, I can't physically go into his dentist shop in the same way that I can't go and see my optician, and I can't go and see, not that I need one, but I couldn't go in theory to see my physiotherapist. So you have to weigh those things up. In fact, I'm sure you're mindful of it. You know, if you're running a restaurant business, well, you can't have people in your premises, but you can have a situation of you can deliver to them. Okay, that's great, but then how on earth do you make that happen? And how on earth do you make that happen profitably? So again, you have to bear in mind all of these things. And obviously, the real acid question here is, can your business cope with the revenue implications? I'm sure these are things that you've been thinking through, but it's worth restating it, because it's a case of actually working out, okay, look, here's what my current revenue is, or has been historically until COVID arrived. Here's what's happened now. Okay, now I need to start trying to work this thing out and plan it out and try and figure out how on earth we're going to move forward, and try and scenario plan those things as much as possible. I'm sure that's something that the advisors can help on here, but it's worth stating it, because really this links back to your segments, it links back to your customer behavior, and ultimately it's going to link back to the way the business operates. Okay, so if there are any questions, then by all means please ask away, but otherwise I'll keep moving through. In fact, I'll stop for 30 seconds in case anyone's got any questions that you'd like to send across to me. Okay, if I'm not seeing any questions, then let's move on. Okay, so we're on the point of how do we keep our customers engaged. Okay, the issue is, what do you do to keep your customers excited? It's a real issue, because we've got a little game coming up in terms of attention spans. You've got 30 seconds to answer the question, what is the attention span of an average person? I'm giving you 30 seconds, and oh, by the way, that is not the answer. Okay, so you're going to need to message me in terms of what you think the average attention span is. Okay, so I want to see some messages to me as to what they are. Okay, and I'm starting the clock now. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully we've got the answers written down. The average attention span of people, believe it or not, it's about 8 or 9 seconds, and that number has gradually decreased over time. So you can see that, especially with phones and with Insta and WhatsApp and Facebook, and we are bombarded by different things that grab away from our attention. So it's difficult to get people's attention, but the key thing is you got to be mindful of that. How do we measure people's attention? Okay, so how do you know where your customers are, and how do you know what they're doing? I'm going to talk a little bit more about the items on the left hand of the screen in a lot more detail when we start talking about our plan for customer retention a bit later on, second half. But what I want to really highlight to you here is some of the measurements. I call them attention measurements, because these are some of the things that show you who's doing what and what your customers are doing and how they're behaving. Now, it used to be in the olden days, you could do time and motion studies of seeing how people behaved in a shop in terms of which items they went to and how long they stayed in those particular places and how they responded to different point of sale material. But we're now going to talk digitally or non-physically, which is obviously much more relevant. So when it comes to websites, clearly Google Analytics is the answer. I'm going to show you a slide in a bit in terms of the data, but even a very simple use as far as Google Analytics are concerned, you're going to wind up getting so much data in terms of how many people have come to your website, where they've originated from in terms of their location, how long they've spent on the website, where they've gone on the different website, on different pages, etc. There's a whole lot of data that shows you what your customer behavior has been and what their retention's been. Okay, when we're talking about email marketing, we've got open rates in terms of you sent emails out to 100 people. What was the open rate? How many of those people actually opened the email? And you'll find with pretty much any software that you're operating with, particularly if you use something like a MailChimp for email, for sending out emails, you'll get all this data. You'll get all that data, so you'll be aware of what that is. And you also get things such as click-through. So if you've got something such as a great promotional offer about one of your products in your email, they will then click through to that. When we're talking about social media, things such as Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter in terms of sharing information, or even, I guess, Instagram, depending, or I guess TikTok being slightly more relevant, shares or likes will give you an indication of what kind of customer activity. I know certainly for LinkedIn, you can actually see how many people have viewed a particular post that you've shared. When we're talking about PR, may not necessarily be so relevant in terms of activity at the moment, but while we're talking about it, we're talking about what the equivalent ad spend might be in terms of column inches, how much you would have spent to get that that kind of coverage. And when we're talking in terms of customer support, what are the lengths of the calls that you're having with customers? How long are those calls lasting for? You can measure all those things. Okay, even if you're not necessarily in an automated call center, you still can have a fairly good idea of what those lengths are. And then I've put there chat lengths. I guess that's on the online side of things, where you're servicing your customers via an online facility. You can you can work out what those what those links are. So that's what you can measure. As I said, there's plenty of data to look at. This is a screenshot of Google Analytics with lots of numbers and lots of graphs and lots of bar charts. If you like data, that's fantastic. But either way, what the take-home point from this is very simple. There are lots of different numbers that give you an indication of what's going on, how's it working, what is the story. So you've got a very clear idea of how engaging you are being with your customer. Okay, so that's great in terms of their attention span and what we're actually measuring. But okay, fine. What am I physically going to do once I've got off the webinar here? What sort of things are we going to do? We'll talk about how to frame it and how to plan it through. But here is a very brief selection, and I'm sure there are probably more things that you could think of that you may want to do, from blogs as in things that you can write about what you're doing, or vlogs as in a video message if you feel up to it and you're brave enough, that suits you in terms of how you do that. Tweets, clearly, photos, the white paper speeches and slides, that's more on a business to business context. The speeches side of things, that's clearly referring to a time when we went to events in person. But slides, again, similarly, if there is a slide deck, you take this for an example. And podcasts, I'm sure you have probably discovered a podcast of choice that you're listening to more, maybe when you're, well, it used to be on your daily walk, but if you're doing more than one walk, then you can listen to more than one podcast. But the idea being is that that's a great way of communicating with your customers. And there are some fantastic examples of that. But by the way, in terms of when you are creating content to engage with your customer, it's got to be little and often, not all the time or intermittently, and it has to be relevant to them, and then it needs to be real rather than just, you know, how marvelous the company is. I know your company is marvelous, but that's really the key thing, and it's got to be of value to them, whatever it may be. So my dentist has been sending me hints and tips about looking after my teeth. I can't get to him in person, but I'm thinking a lot more about him because of his advice. My optician, on the other hand, I've not heard anything from them. Okay, that's interesting. They may not be my optician when I can go to an optician, but it doesn't really matter. It's got to be professional. By that I mean the grammar has to be correct, the phrasing has to be correct. Those things matter. Consumable, it means that you can digest the content very easily, and shareable, that means, you know, as it suggests. Okay. There is one other thing. Okay, so this is a fairly dated slide for those of you that that remember this particular campaign. The person in the picture is a brilliant actress by the name of Maureen Lipman. This was an advertising campaign run by British Telecom. It was a series of ads which are, if you look at them now, are unbelievably dated and extremely amusing. But the idea behind this slide is very simple. We can pick up the phone. We can actually just pick up the phone and talk to our customers, even if it's literally just asking them about how they're doing and how they are handling things and how they're coping and are they safe and are they well. Sometimes that's not always an easy thing to do, particularly if you don't particularly feel in the mood to do so, and you feel your customers may not be doing so. But you'd be amazed as to what the impact of that can have, because ultimately it's about fostering the connectivity with your customers. So hopefully that'll give you a range of different things that you probably have done already, or if you haven't, then certainly would like to think about doing. So I don't know if anyone's got any examples or anything that they want to message me with, then by all means please do so. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit more, a bit of Q&A for you actually. So if anyone's got any particular questions or any particular comments, then by all means please send across to me privately or across to everybody. Okay, so there, I will move to the next point, which is the final section before we get to our break, which is probably going to be in about 15 minutes, something like that. Okay. So how your communication and tone needs to adapt. So just if we kind of run through the order that we've been working through here. So we know who our segments are. We know why they are connected to our business. We're also measuring in terms of how they're interacting with us. We've got an idea of the different things that we can do. This is really the kind of the point of really getting to the how we communicate with them. And this is much harder to do because internally we're grappling with pretty significant issues within the business, and we also know that our customers are grappling with a lot of issues themselves, and we have to think about our tone of voice, and it's not what you said, but it's how you said it, and that is a very difficult thing to do, because sometimes when you're very close to things, you don't always realize how they come across and what that means. Now, got a little bit of an exercise for you on this one. So what I'd like you to do is, if you take a I've got an email or a page on your website, or it might have been an SMS, or it might have been any other form of comms that you've got, communications that you sent out to your customers. And over the next 60 seconds, I'd like you to read that, and I'd like you to look at the language. In particular, what sort of language are you using? Is the language caring? Is it aggressive? Is it very salesy? Is it empathetic? Is it desperate? I don't know. I haven't got the examples in front of me, but I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to have a look at that and see what it looks like, just as an exercise yourself that you can read through that and kind of have a think through. Time starts now. 10 seconds on this one. Okay, so there we go. So I'm hoping that as you went through that, you didn't get any nasty surprises when you just thought, oh, goodness me, I can't believe I said that. The point being is that I'm sure we've all been bombarded by lots of emails and messages from different companies. The overriding thing that I've seen from across the different networks that I'm connected with and different colleagues that I've been speaking to is the need for empathy and the need for understanding in terms of communications. There is a need to communicate, there is a need to remain connected, but there's also a need to understand what's going on. And obviously, it might be a fairly straightforward thing to say, but it's probably worth stating at this point. Those of you that run businesses right now and have other people that you employ, those people may be currently furloughed, maybe for the initial period of the scheme, maybe even for the extended piece. But one of the key things is that although we're talking about customer communication, your internal customers, in inverted commas, are people that you employ. And clearly, there's very, very strong case in terms of being mindful of that communication as well. It's easily overlooked, particularly if you're facing a very, very, very challenging time yourself, which we all are. But it's about thinking as far as those things are concerned. This is a very old sales adage, and I can't even remember the last person that told this to me. I'm sure you may have heard this before. And it kind of goes like this, and it's actually a visual one I can do. You have one of these, your customers has two of those, so use these more than that. And I guess obviously I'm not practicing that while I'm presenting this to you. So I apologize. Hopefully it's a case of that I should do as I am saying rather than not, but you'll see what I mean in a second. The idea being is that right now, it's probably more important to listen to what your customers are saying to you than it is for you just to broadcast to them and be totally, I wouldn't say ignore what they're saying. It's very, very, very important to understand that. I have an example of somebody within my network. Their business has been fairly adversely impacted right now. They've spent the time to actually call their key customers and have a chat with them and say, look, what's going on? How's the situation? How have you been impacted? What are your key priorities? How do you see things moving forward? When are you going to have people back in the office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are people working remotely? Now, it might look a fairly trite thing to say, but the truth is we often overlook the importance of listening to our customers. Yes, we can measure all those things. as I mentioned, in terms of how often people are on sites or how long calls are lasting. But the other point that this exercise is really about is to actually listen. What is it that they're actually telling us? What kind of comments are they telling us? What are there some common themes that we can draw conclusions of here? Those things are really, really important to bear in mind. I'm sure some of you may have been in situations where you've had certain customers who have complained about certain things. I know we've all had examples of poor customer service. Obviously, the examples of poor customer service we remember because they were poor. The examples of great customer service we also remember because they were great. But as a business, we can actually learn an awfully lot more from sometimes those experiences that weren't so positive. We can actually understand a lot more and appreciate a lot more just by listening to what our customers have to say. So it's a bit of a trite mantra, but it's a useful mantra nonetheless. So I guess bringing this all together, this is really about understanding your customer. We've gone through the exercise in terms of the segmentation side of things, and we've gone through what they're doing, and also thinking about what the end goal is here. Now, clearly, a fairly obvious goal for us is that we want our businesses intact. We want our businesses to survive. We want our businesses to thrive if they can. But we have to think about that, and we also have to think about the situation that our customers are in as well. But by the same account, we also have to plan ahead and see where things are moving. As we'll discuss later on, the timeframes may be slightly different from where they were before. But we also have to strike the balance between emotion and fact. By that I mean, you may have some factual things going on in terms of you're offering your customers a certain product, you're offering them a certain service, it has a certain price, there's a certain promotion, whatever that may be, that's a factual thing. But there's also the emotional element to it. There's also the emotional situation that they may find themselves in, and likewise, there's also the emotional situation that you find yourself in. It's about balancing those things and having those things in mind as you navigate your way through. I'm going to stop for a few more questions if we have any, or any comments at all. Okay. And now we get to a slide that I'm sure you're all going to enjoy, right? Okay, so you can put your webcams onto mute, or I guess put yourselves onto mute and mute the webcams as well. You've got at the moment we're coming up to about 10 past 11. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a longer break because I'm sure there's quite a few bits to catch up on, given the fact that we're the day after a bank holiday. So why don't we reconvene for 1/2 as per the schedule, and then we'll go through the various bits in terms of what our action plan is, etc. And I will see you hopefully at 1/2 the hour. Okay. Welcome back. I hope you had a good coffee break and stretch of legs, bit of fresh air, hopefully, and have caught up on all the emails. I did message people back in terms of their questions, in terms of what they want to see for second half. So do write back if there's anything in particular. But if not, I'm going to crack on with part 4. So now it's time to design an action plan, and this is really the key thing as far as interacting with customers is concerned. It's great to know who they are and how they behave and the right way in which to talk to them, but it's all in the action. Theory is great, but it's about the action. So let's crack on and see how we go. Okay, so I don't know about you, but there have always been people that you've worked with that have kind of come up with key phrases that kind of annoy you at the time, but sometimes stick with you. And this is one that certainly stuck with me in terms of planning. Is in we don't plan to fail, we just fail to plan. Now there is a fine balance between war and peace or an envelope. So by that I mean sometimes you have people that spend so much time planning that they almost forget about what it is they actually need to do. And sometimes people can kind of come up with a plan on the back of an envelope or back of a beer mat, and it's not quite what we need. We need slightly more details than that. So there is a balance to be had, and it's probably worth remembering and worth going through what, as I put it, are the key ingredients as far as these things are concerned, because sometimes it's worth restating them. So within any plan, there needs to be an objective, and I put SMART in brackets, which is simple, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So if we're talking about our customers here, we can set objectives being to retain the customers that we have, or to lose X%, or to achieve a revenue of X hundred, X thousand pounds, whatever it may be. Those are the objectives that we need to have. And every plan has to have that, because otherwise there's no way of framing it, and it just kind of becomes a set of aspirations which then can't then materialize into particular activities. Then there needs to be a strategy. I've got a slide of it later on, which kind of really gives you the difference between strategy and objectives and tactics, because people talk about, oh, we need a strategy for this and a strategy for that and a strategy for the other. When you start kind of poking a little bit deeper, you realize actually, well, no, they're not talking about a strategy. They might just be talking about implementing certain things, which comes down to our tactical things. What is it that we're physically going to do? Again, I'm going to run through that in more detail. Budgets. You cannot do things on air alone. And if people say, well, you know, it doesn't cost me anything to do it. Well, the truth is it does, because your time is a cost. And the flip side to that is there's an opportunity cost in terms of doing one thing, you could be doing something else. So there is an inherent cost there. And then obviously the last point, which some don't always enjoy that much, is the measuring piece. We did discuss a little bit before about that in terms of Google Analytics, etc., and call lengths and click rates and open rates. But you've got to be able to measure what you're doing, because otherwise, how do you know whether you're being successful? You think it's successful, you know it's successful, and particularly if you're in a situation where you're going to be going after funding or increased funding. I know a lot of businesses I've been speaking to have found that the situation they're in right now has put funding on hold, which is clearly a very difficult point to be in. But the key things that are going to really make a difference is if you've got the measurements and you've got the metrics and the numbers that you can show to people and go, look, this is how many people we have, this is what we've done, this is how people have responded, this is what we're seeing. And those sorts of things, they do two things. Firstly, they obviously reassure those people, but secondly, you actually get a feeling going, aha, you know what, this is working, or this is not working, or we need to change it. And that in itself, given the uncertainty and the difficulty that we find ourselves in, that can really help. Okay. So another point in terms of planning, it's it's about the actions in the plan, not the plan. As I've said to you before, sometimes you can get so caught up on your planning. It's like the old adage, if anybody has teenagers in the house or knows of people that are teenagers, I guess it's not relevant this year because the exams have been cancelled. But you know the old adage, as we kind of veer towards exam time, that you have people that spend so long preparing the revision timetable, they don't actually bother doing any revision. It can sometimes be like that with planning, that people spend so long on a plan and finessing the plan and working through the plan that they actually forget about the actions. And plans live. It's not great. This is a really nice document. I'll store it somewhere online. It's it's on the shared drive. It's on the intranet. It's on OneDrive or Dropbox. It's there if you want to reference it. They have to evolve because the market evolves. Your customers evolve. Nothing stays the same. So therefore, your plan is kind of, I guess, that framework around which action lives. So I've put here about whether you're going for a marketing plan or a segment plan, you decide. There's a specific reason for that. You may have, as we discussed earlier, early on to the beginning of the webinar, about which are your customer segments, what your key customers and key segments that you put them in. You may have a particular plan for that segment of customer. Therefore, you have to plan accordingly, rather than just saying our overall marketing plan is, and that's it. Now, review of your plan. Now, sometimes planning reviews take on a life of their own, and it's an entire day of poring over the data and mulling through things. We're working in different timeframes right now. We're working in very, very different timeframes. And to be honest, with certain businesses, that review of your plan may be happening on an hourly basis in certain instances. Sometimes it might be a daily basis, certainly weekly right now, undoubtedly monthly, and I don't even think, well, for some businesses, yes, we can talk quarterly, and clearly government statistics on the state of the economy are stated in a quarter by quarter. Now, that might not be relevant right now. It may be more relevant in the future, but the point is, there has to be a review. Where are we going? What's going on? I mean, I remember I've worked with a particular client where we had a weekly review of activity of what was going on. That was being done purely and simply to keep everybody in check, so everybody knew what the plan was, everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing, how they were supposed to be doing it, etc. That's really the key thing. So it's worth bearing those things in mind as you go through. So I thought I'd put a particular slide in. I called it the buzzword buster because sometimes I've tried to steer away from, as we call TLA, three-letter abbreviations. We're using lots of buzzwords which make me sound very intelligent, right? But are confusing. So the thing that I really wanted to kind of define and explain to you is the difference between an objective, a strategy, and a tactic. I'm going to start from the objective side of things. As you can see there, the objective is the target. So if you can imagine that we're shooting a bow and arrow at an archery range, we can see we've got our crosshair, and in the center, that is where we want to get our business to. That is what it is that we want to achieve. We want to achieve a growth of X%. We want to achieve a revenue, or we want to achieve a net profit, or we want to achieve a number of customers, or we want to achieve a number of people within the business, or we want to achieve a number of locations of our business, for example, or we want to start offering the full range of products, for example. Those are our objectives. We know what they are. We can they are simple to understand, they are simple to express. We can put them in terms of a time frame, as we want to have X revenue by next year, by next month, by 3 years time. Okay, so that's what our objective is. That's what we're trying to do. The strategy is the way in which we're going to make that happen. So the lovely analogy that I like to use is, and I suppose it's not that relevant right now, but we're hoping that it's going to be relevant very soon, is I need to go to here to Edinburgh. That's my objective. My objective is I want to get from here to Edinburgh. So my strategy is how am I going to approach it? Well, am I going to take a direct route? Am I going to take an indirect route? Is it something that I'm going to do on my own? Is it something where I'm going to need a secondary party? So if it's something I'm going to do on my own, I'll get in my car and if I drive, or if I'm really feeling the need, I'll get on foot. Or maybe it's the case of if I'm going to do it by train or I'm going to do it by plane. So the strategy is working out how I'm going to do it. And then when it comes to the tactics, it's what I'm physically going to do. So in the case of if I've decided I'm going to go by train, so I'm going to go on to the website, I'm going to work out what are my options, I'm going to work out what my fares are, I'm going to work out what my timings are, I'm going to work out whether I do it direct or whether I do it by multiple changes, whether there are different promotions, etc., etc. So that hopefully should give you an idea of exactly what to do in terms of the splitting up. Okay, so so hopefully that helps you. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to pick one segment and work out an objective, a strategy, and maybe one or two tactics that you can physically do, right? So very, very quickly, just a bit of a sprint plan, but the 60 seconds are going to start right now. Okay, so I'm hoping that that helped. So I'd like to address this one particularly to Sheila. Thank you for your question. I'm hoping that by now you've probably done some of that segmentation with the different customer bases that you've outlined, and worked through some ideas. Okay. Here's a little offer for you. If you didn't get that far in terms of the exercise is concerned, I have a template plan which you are more than welcome to. If you message me directly, I'll be happy to do so. I will be showing my details at the end of the presentation. So I have a very nice outline thing which really just helps frame everything. So more than happy. Okay. So I noticed we had a question in terms of the difference between an objective, aim and objective. Okay, that's a really good question. So in terms of the difference between an aim and an objective, if I can get my teeth in there, aims tend to be much more vague and much more overarching. So we aim to dominate a particular market segment. We aim to have a global presence or a European presence. We aim to move from being a startup to a scale up. We aim to be a market leader in our segment. So, that's an aim, which is, as you can see, tends to be blue sky picture and not as specific. When you say, okay, you aim to be a scale up, what do you mean? What does that mean? What that means is I aim to have 20 employees. I aim to have a turnover of above 2 million. Okay, so that leads us then into our objective. So if you look at, sometimes companies have a mission statement. So the mission and the aim tend to be similar, and then that rolls through. Okay, so I will send you across the template when we're done. Thank you for asking. My absolute pleasure. Okay. So we've had some Q&A already, which is great, and thank you. Okay, so I want to dive into tools and tactics, because that's really where things matter, and that's really where the difference is made. Okay, but before I kind of jump into all of the details and come up with all these great and super ideas of things that you can come up with, it's worth stepping back and thinking about the following, because often when I've worked in a consultative capacity for businesses, it's all great to have the ideas, but people often sit in the room and go, yeah, all right, guy, that's really nice, Mark, but you know what? You want to work here. You want to know what's really going on here. You want to work out what the real pressures are and what's really happening. So whilst I might turn around to you and say, wouldn't it be a great idea to have, put together a promotional video? You can look at me and go, yeah, Mark, that's a great idea, but that's going to cost me, that's going to cost me £2,000. I don't have £2,000. And then there's the issue of, yes, well, what would be great is if you wrote, a series of emails with some newsletters to your customers, how about one a week? Well, I'm not a writer. That's going to take me hours. I have other issues that I really need to deal with. Well, how about if we have, one of your guys on the, who can deal with the automated chat responses online, so that way they can deal with customer queries. Well, hang on a second. A lot of the people in my business are fantastic on the phone, but they're not great in terms of using technology. So there are considerations before we start diving into the actions where, what are the costs as far as these things are concerned? What about the time that it's going to take me to do these things? If I need to do something in the next week or so, and it's going to take me a month to do something, and then the ability to execute, am I actually going to be able to do this within my business? Because sometimes less is more. This is very, very, very often overlooked, because people just think in the mad dash of, I've got to do something, because we have a situation, we have to deal with it. Let's just run and do. Less is more. Sometimes it's better to do one or two things really well that are really focused and really targeted than try and run around and do 150 things. Yes, it would be great to do all those 10 things, but if we only have time and we have to prioritize and focus on those things, then that's the most important thing. Then it's worth bearing those things in mind, because often in the rush to deal with the situation, we don't bear those things in mind. And it's important to be kind of mindful of those things. Okay, so let's dig into a little bit more detail here, what we're actually talking about and what do we mean. Okay, so first up, I've put on the social side of things, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't know if anybody else is using other platforms that I may have missed out. I suppose I could put WhatsApp on there as well, where we're talking about putting, posting content, whatever that may be. Now, it's important that you bear in mind who you are posting to, which people are following your pages, how much content there is in terms of character amounts, and what you're trying to do. Ultimately, what you're really trying to do from a social network perspective, and I guess it's an entire dedicated session unto itself, but without getting into too much detail, because we're talking about interacting with customers here, we want to use that public forum and drive them away from those public sites onto our private fora. Because even if people are messaging you directly on Facebook or directly on Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, you do not own those platforms. Those platforms are external platforms. I know you know that, but sometimes it's actually worth thinking about that and bearing that in mind. And ultimately, what you want to do is you want to drive them to you directly. So that could be through email, that could be through to your website, could be to a landing page, could be on the phone. Doesn't really matter, but it's about having that direct connection. So yes, there are things that you can be posting. It could be a case of posting what your business is up to right now. If the business is open again, if people are in the business and they're wearing PPE and they're socially distanced, or if it's a case of it could be something social, like send me a photo of your garden, or send me a photo of something you're doing, or send me a photo of something that you're homeschooling, or it doesn't really matter what it may be, but it might be appropriate. And obviously your customers better than I do, and you know what you think is going to work or isn't going to work. But that's from your perspective. Socially, that's one of the things in your toolkit that you need to think about doing. And you know how many followers you have, you know how many connections you have. So bear that one in mind. Then the blog. I've mentioned this before. A blog, I guess, is kind of electronic article, could be on all manner of topics. Often blogs tend to work really well where you have people who are happy in writing. Not everybody is happy in writing, but depends what your flavor is. I put website plus social because you're obviously going to take the link of that blog and, as I would say, socialize it, which means share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn, share it on Twitter. And that way, again, you're driving people back to the site, and you can obviously take that link of a blog and put it into an email, which we'll discuss momentarily. Vlogs, as in a video log. So, it could be a very, very short video. It doesn't have to be particularly professionally produced. You can just do it with your phone, where you're talking to camera for 90 seconds about what's going on. As far as the business is concerned, or sharing some thoughts of what you're seeing, whatever it may be. And again, that can be placed on the website, that could be shared socially, same idea. Photos, similar idea. Clearly that tends to work more in terms of products. If you've got a product business where you've got some photography you can do, again, it's not necessarily something you can do to phone up and book a photographer. That's not possible, but you have something you could do with your phone. Emails, again, I go back to emails because often people underrate the value and the power that an email can have. If it's well written and it's thought through and there's some really interesting and valuable information for your customers, and you get into a habit of saying, right, I'm going to send an email out once a fortnight, or maybe once a week. It comes down to what you're able to do. And remember, you can automate these things. So it's not a case of that you have to do everything on your own, but making sure you've got the data and the information done correctly. I mean, I personally have used the tool MailChimp. I really find that a very easy tool to work with in terms of designing templates and writing the material and then sending the information out. I find that easy to use. I'm sure there are other templates that you find that are much easier to use. Podcasts. Okay, so this is slightly more complicated in terms of how you do this and how you go about doing it. There are different platforms out there that you can use. I mean, you can actually get to a situation where, and I guess how many of us knew this 3 months ago, where you could, by way of example, set up a Zoom web conference, or I guess whichever other platform that you like to use, and record that, and that then turns into an audio. The audio file that you then have can effectively act as a podcast for you to use. So by way of example, you could connect to a couple of your partners if you have a business where that happens, or a couple of experts, and you can say, right, you know what, for the next 20 minutes we're going to discuss the implications to our industry, or what we're seeing, or what we think, how we think things are going to evolve. 15-20 minutes, something like that. Then once you've recorded it, you've got that, and you can share that with people. And again, you post it somewhere as a link, people can access it. So that's not to say that it needs to be, an hour podcast that's been, very carefully crafted and produced, but it's just thinking about these different ideas that you can do. White papers. Now, white papers tend to be slightly longer documents explaining things in greater detail. and they tend to be, but not always, used in a business-to-business setting, where people want to explain in more detail about a particular product or service or issue within the industry. Tends to be of a longer read, but again, that's something that you can put together. Likewise, in terms of a slide deck, if you're presenting. Again, these are just examples within the toolkit that you may have. I mean, you could be a bit, you know, slightly alternative on this. I mean, if you're into drawing and you've created some artwork, for example, or if you've done something else that's more creative and you want to share that, ultimately it's about having content of some description which you are sharing. And then obviously I put slides down there. Again, you know, kind of goes back to the point similar to white papers, but you're just talking about a slide deck. And I guess if you were to use a tool like Zoom and to share that with somebody and record it, they would therefore, much as this webinar is being recorded right now, would be exactly the same scenario. And then the last one, which I know we had the specific more in-depth graphic before, but yeah, calling people. Now, that isn't always an easy thing to do, but you might want to turn around and say, you know what, today or this afternoon, after we finish the session, I'm going to phone 3 customers. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to phone 3 customers and say, look, just phoning, just to hear how things are going with you, you know, what the situation is with you, as opposed to, I want to sell you something down the phone. You'd be amazed how people respond when you actually pick up the phone. It sounds tremendously old-fashioned, but I'm sure you've read so much about how people have rediscovered the ability to speak to people via the phone, not necessarily via video. Not everybody is comfortable. I'm obviously comfortable being on a webinar, showing my face, but you'd be surprised that there are some people that don't really like it. Some people are very happy to do that. But it all depends. But that's within your toolkit, okay, that you have to mind. Now, don't forget, and you're probably looking at this thinking, I don't understand what this means. Don't forget to integrate. A great story. A number of years ago, I was doing work with an enterprise software company, and the CEO called me in and said, "Look, you know, I've got a problem with my business. My business is just not growing." I said to him, "Okay, I have a little bit more than that." And he said, "Well, look, the thing is, I've done the research, I've done the desk work. There's a really big addressable market here. So I don't understand why we're not making any traction, we're not making any headway." At which point I then said to him, "Okay, well, why don't you tell me what it is that you're doing?" "Well, we've tried a bit of this, and we tried a bit of that, and we tried a bit of the other, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. We tried this, and we moved on to that, and then we tried." I said to him, "Well, sorry, can I just check that you've tried all of these different things?" Yeah, we've tried all these different things. Some of them have worked and some of them haven't." I said, "Well, I think I know what the problem is." And he's like, "Really? I'd like to know." "The problem that you've got is that you haven't integrated all of the different activities in a coherent way. And that's the really, really important thing, particularly with all activity, is that you make sure if you're sending an email out to your customers promoting a particular offer, and then one of your other colleagues has been tasked with the call down to 3 or 4 customers, and you know that email's gone out, you should know that an email has just gone out, or you should know what the last blog was about. It's about integrating these things. If you were to send the same customer the email and call, you know, within half an hour of each other, I don't think your customer would be that excited about it. But it's about having all of these things coordinated, because the challenge that you've got is, or that we all have, is different customers like to connect with you in different ways. You have some customers who are very comfortable on doing all things through social media. Yeah, they are absolutely fine having, you know, DMing you, direct messaging or private messaging you. That's absolutely fine. You have other people, forget it. They're old school and they like to speak to somebody on the phone. And when they phone up, they actually would like somebody to answer the phone, as opposed to just have some automated response, which gets you to, you know, dial in a bunch of numbers which you don't know what they are. And if you know the number, if you know the extension number of the person that you want to speak to, and you don't know that, but it's about, some people might want to have all 3. So it's about working out what your customer wants and integrating it. That's the really significant thing, because so often, if you do things in isolation, you can have a situation where you have two people in your business running after the same customer, and that isn't a good look. It's a waste of your own resources, and more to the point, you run the real risk of upsetting and even potentially losing a customer. Okay, so I'm hoping that all comes through. Any other particular questions at this point? Okay, so we have about an hour to run here. So let me take you through, because we're now actually at the point here where we're talking about building brand loyalty. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to basics in terms of branding here. This is not gonna be exhaustive, but let me talk you through what we're talking about. There are lots of different points about branding, and yes, that probably could be devoted to an entire presentation within its own right, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to kind of take you through some of the pointers which you are probably aware of, but not necessarily, and it's worth talking them through. So people talk about, you know, the brand essence. So what is the brand essence? What is the basis of your company? Or they talk about brand values or the pillars of the brand. I think I try to boil this down in quite a simple way, because simple works best, certainly works best for me. A brand represents everything that your company is about, everything that your company represents. I guess in many ways, for smaller businesses, that tends to be so much easier, because you know what you're about. You know, if you are a company that supports companies by saving them money, your essence is that you are brilliant at providing honest advice and really great solutions that fit those businesses. That's really a key thing. Geeta, I'm going to come back to your question in a bit. I've just noticed it now. Okay, that's much easier to define. People talk about what the values of the brand are. Is it, you know, are you a youthful brand? Are you a brand that represents excellence? Are you a technically great brand? Are you a brand that's really about being customer focused? Are you a brand that's innovative, that's trying new solutions? Are you a brand that's about providing really great value for money? Obviously, you may be all of those things, but you may stand for certain things. Those things represent themselves a lot more. And I think it's about working out what your business is all about. Now, often I like to define brand as being the sum total of the entire connection that you have with not just a customer and not just people that you employ, but with the entire environment around you. So by that I mean everything counts as far as a brand is concerned. A while ago, I remember running a session for some lawyers about branding, and they all kind of rolled their eyes. But everything counts, from the website is the language on the website represents a certain thing, to the person answering the phone operates in a certain way, to the language that is used. All of those things, that represents a certain, it's all part of the bits that pull together as far as a brand is concerned. You have certain things like brand guidelines, where certainly tends to be in larger companies where there's very strict guidelines as to, you know, what font you use and what color when we're doing the logo and what wording, etc. I think the really important thing there is that is about consistency. Because if the same customer, how many times have you had a situation where you'll phone up a company and you want to renew a contract and you get offered one thing, and you go, oh, I'll go away and I'll think about it. And then you come back and you phone again and you get something completely different. And you just get confused and think, what? I didn't get that. What you've told me doesn't match to what's on your website, which doesn't match to the letter I got in the post today or the email I got last week. I'm just confused. And that doesn't help me as far as as far as the brand is concerned and the connectivity. And then we talk about loyalty. If you think about some of the people that are in your business and that have worked with you, how loyal they are, how connected they are, how important that your company is to them. If you may well have been reading that a lot of the more traditional established brands have fared better in the current situation. And the reason for that has been purely and simply because people know those brands, they trust those brands, they're aware of those brands, they know what they're getting with those brands. They're getting a certain quality, they're getting a certain experience, they know they're going to be paying a certain price. What you see is what you get. That is an adage that is worth noting. And the other adage is you get what you pay for. Sometimes if you are a premium priced brand, you're premium for a reason. You're premium because there's something special about what you do. There's something unique about what you do. There's something that you can do that others can't. Okay, you're going to say to me, well, there are lots of people that can do what I can do. What makes me different? What makes you different is you. It's the values that you represent. It's your personal story. How many times are there stories of companies that are set up because a particular person said, oh, the experience I had was terrible in this company. The way they did things was awful. I wanted to change that. And therefore, that is what comes through. If you take, for example, Innocent Drinks, their whole focus was on using pure, naturally sourced ingredients by way of example. Or if you take a company that operates within, I had an example of going to a phenomenal pizza restaurant, which I won't name, and they were gluten-free. And the reason why they were gluten-free was because the owner of the restaurant had a niece who was a celiac, and he decided that he would spend time in creating gluten-free recipes for her, and then decided, you know what, that's going to be the idea for my restaurant, and that's what's going to drive me. Those different things, that's what represents the essence of the brand, because the brand, and I'm using the words interchangeably, but I'm hoping that by now you're probably realizing that brand and company, they're not necessarily two of the same things, because you have different brands of chocolate, you have different brands of hand cream, you have different brands of water, you have different brands of coffee, and even within a given company, you'll have different brands of different things. But even within the company name, that's going to represent something. That's going to mean something. How often do you have, why is the company named in that way? Oh, it's called that now. It's called that way because of this, that, and the other. So it's important to understand those assumptions, because they're often overlooked. Where people talk about, I've got to build a brand. I've got to build a brand. And often I find, particularly with smaller companies that are emerging, brand building, wouldn't say shouldn't be a focus, but it shouldn't necessarily be something that is such a priority, rather than getting the basics right, as in rather than getting a number that works when people call it, or an email address that when people send an email to, it is responded to within within a specific time. So it's about thinking about those things. Okay, so when people talk about brand awareness, it's important to put within that a number of different category areas of activity that are involved in terms of building the brand and creating the brand. So I'm going to take you through them. You may well be familiar with a lot of these terms. And thank you, David, in terms of your request. I will send it across when we're finished. Appreciated. In fact, before I actually run through that, Geeta, I'm gonna deal with your question about customer wants and about what they need. Okay, that's a really, really good question. So I'm going to change my mind here. I'm going to deal with that later on when we get to the Q&A session, when we talked about needs and wants. Okay, I'll talk to that later, but I want to go back to I guess the building blocks of activity as far as raising awareness for your brand. So again, I'm making the assumption that we know what our brand stands for. We know what the values of those brands are. Everybody within the company is aware of that, and they're consistent. And we are aiming for a loyalty both of the of people internally who want to stay with our business, and also externally, people come back to us because they love us and they know us and they trust us, right? So let's talk about these different things. And obviously, as to the point about integration that I mentioned before, these things don't operate in a vacuum on their own. They need to be integrated and they need to work together. So the first thing is content marketing. So if I take you back to that slide a couple of points ago about blogs and emails and posts and podcasts and white papers, that really falls under the title content marketing, as in content that we produce and that we use in our marketing, whatever that may be. That could be our content that we have created ourselves. Sometimes it could be content that our customers have produced. How many times do you are able to use an endorsement from a customer and say, obviously with their permission, that they're happy for you to use that? That is content, all of which is creating awareness of our company and our brand and what we do. PR, public relations. You could probably devote an entire webinar to PR in terms of what PR is and how it operates and what we do. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because that's not the purpose of the webinar today. But the point is that by PR, you get your name out, the word comes out, people are made aware of the company name through PR. Do not confuse PR with advertising, by the way. Advertising, you've paid for that, and I guess you would use content that you created to get awareness because you bought your spot or you've paid for your advert. PR is normally when you haven't paid for it. So it could be a comment in press, it could be an interview on the radio, it could be participating in a podcast, whatever it may be. Social media, again, is another great example of making people aware of what your brand is. We've discussed it before in terms of whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter. Now, it does raise the interesting point of personal versus business as far as the brand is concerned. Often you will find that within social media, you are posting as yourself as an individual. That is not the same as your business. So you may therefore want to have your own business profile or account, etc., as far as social media is concerned. And yes, there are instances where people are very concerned about creating a LinkedIn company page where people are following that page by way of example. Ultimately, whether you're putting those individuals out yourself or whether that content out as an individual or as a business doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are getting your name out and the word out. That's really of the company name. That's really what matters more than anything else. So SEO, sorry for the three-letter abbreviation, but I'm going to mention it anyway. That is search engine optimization. So just by way of an explanation, and again, probably you could dedicate or devote an entire webinar to this on its own. What we mean by search engine, we mean something such as Google, that you would to search for a particular term. You optimize your website by ensuring that the coding is correct and the backlinks are correct. So when people go onto Google and they are looking for something, your website ranks highly as far as the listings are concerned when you get a response. You can actually do paid SEO, so therefore your website gets higher up as an advert. But the takeaway point for all of this is that ultimately it's making people aware of your company and your brand and getting them to your website, which is obviously a very, very important real estate as far as your brand is concerned. Sponsorship. Okay, so this may not necessarily be relevant to you right now. Budgets are very tight, but it's something to consider when we're talking about building brand loyalty. You will often find more often than not that larger brands tend to be involved in sponsorship. notable examples of things like sponsoring major sporting events, or which obviously isn't relevant right now, or could be sponsoring major concerts. Again, doesn't really happen. Although quite an interesting example, which I've taken half an eye on, is the Meerkat sponsorship of bringing Take That online. I don't know if that's if that's something of interest to you, but the point is that that is a great example of brand awareness right now, where that brand is sponsoring an event that is happening online that people will engage with. They may be more interested in Take That than the sponsor, but the truth is they are going to be made of the sponsor. Partnership marketing. Okay, this is actually probably as relevant now as it's ever been, probably even more relevant now. By partnership marketing, I mean when you have business partners that you work with, you can do things together. So I guess webinars together, or podcasts together, or even some form of joint events. I've seen a lot more companies actually trying to use online events. I've actually been to a couple of Zoom networking events, which are interesting experiences in terms of the breakout rooms, but happy to discuss further. But the point is, if you're working in association with another company, what you're doing is your brand gets a mention. This becomes particularly relevant, by the way, when you're dealing with smaller companies, because often smaller companies don't have the budget, but can work with much larger companies who are happy to put their name in with doing what's known as co-marketing events or co-branding events, and that's a great way to get the name out there. Event marketing. Now, I in the past have done actual whole webinars on talking about event marketing. That is a classic example of where the situation right now has radically changed things, and I think is going to change things in a fairly significant way. So I have seen a number of different platforms out there for use of online events. Back in the day, we can remember further back than at the beginning of the year, people would go to an event. There might be branding of a company, stickers on the floor to send you to the right way, or maybe the carrier bag or the event guide was sponsored with a brand of a company, or you would have a stand and giveaways, etc., etc. And there's a whole lot of marketing that's associated with that. That gets your name out. I am told that restrictions are going to be that street markets are going to be open in the not too distant future. That is an event of sorts that you may think about if that's relevant or possible. Again, it's all about getting your name out and making your name being aware, so that way people can connect to you, and it's about integrating those things. So by way of example, if you send people an email and you're going to be at a particular event, say let's book an appointment to meet one another at such and such a thing. You can even do that online. I've actually even done that myself, where I was involved in a particular platform, and I've said to that person, let's make sure that on this particular event we wind up connecting. Again, it's all about making sure people are aware of the company, the brand, and using these different tactics together. Not always obvious to think about, but what we're talking about is building or continuing to build the connectivity with our customers. We have to continually do that. We cannot just sit back and go, there are customers, no need to worry, we're sure they're going to come back, because the truth is other brands out there that are making that effort and making that activity, you're only one click away from losing your customer, right? Because how many times have you had an experience where you wanted to get something and then you do your Google search and you see your long list of companies and you click on one and you go 1, 2, 3, the site isn't loading, right, go back, next one, click on down, that link, that customer, you've just disappeared. Okay, so it's an obvious one, but it's worth reflecting on all those points. If you have any questions on that, keep them coming. Okay, so when we're talking about brand loyalty, again, this is fairly obvious, but it's worth stating these things anyway. The whole issue with brand loyalty is you want to maintain that connection, you want to maintain that link, you want to maintain that relationship. Now, clearly that becomes challenging when you've got tens or thousands of customers. Hence, obviously, we get to the segmentation point. So clearly, those that are more valuable to you need to be given more care and attention. When you're talking about in the hundreds, again, it becomes tricky, but particularly when you're talking on the business to business front, sometimes I'll work with companies and I'll say, well, you know, who is on our dream list? Who is it that we want to maintain links with? And it may be we're talking about 10, 15 customers that it's really important. Sometimes you have it's about maintaining that connection with them, making sure, no, you can't take people out to dinner. That's not going to work. That doesn't happen anymore. But there are other ways in which you can have that connectivity. I've put here about reduced churn. It's not a particularly great term, but people would often talk about customer churn, where you've got a churn through in terms of losing of customers. That we'll have X hundred new subscribers, but then we've got X hundred that have lost. By brand loyalty, what you're doing is you're reducing that. You're reducing that that rate at which you're losing a customer, because obviously about the cost of customer acquisition, about how long it's going to take you to actually get that customer, and how much it's going to cost you to do that. That, and you can probably work that out. So therefore, what you want to do is you want to try and reduce that loss, because I don't have the stats on it, but the chances are the money that you're going to spend to maintain those customers and keep them on board is going to be less than the money you're going to spend in terms of trying to acquire new customers. And obviously the last point, which is fairly obvious, but it's worth stating it nonetheless, you want to be able to grow your revenues. You want to be able to onboard a customer, make sure they're yours, and then offer them new services, which therefore means the value of that customer increases. That's what you're aiming towards, and that's really what brand loyalty is all about. That's what you're trying to build towards. Now, building brand loyalty means building it. By that I mean it's not something that gets done overnight. You do not build a brand overnight, and I'm sure there are plenty of case studies, whether it's Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, Microsoft, IBM, Procter & Gamble, you name it. We could spend the rest of the session just going through it. But the idea being is you're building it. You're building it step by step, brick by brick. If you take the building analogy, I know we've got the cranes and the scaffolding in front of us. What are the foundations? The foundations are you're establishing what your brand is all about, what your brand stands for, who is it you're going to be targeting, what you're going to be targeting them with. That's the foundations. The bricks therefore become the different activities that you do, and then obviously as you bring more customers on board and as the revenue increases, so therefore the brand itself evolves. You're doing more things and different things, and you bring different people into the organization and they have different skills to offer. So the building gets built up. But it's a building thing, it's a gradual thing. It's not just a right, we've done a bit of activity, great, wonderful, brilliant, job done. It's a gradual process that you build it. Okay, so okay, great, fine. I understand what my brand is. I understand what the benefits are. I get what the different buckets of activities are. I get the fact I need to build it. Okay, very good. But what are the key steps? What do I need to go through? Okay, well, we need to plan. Okay, now we discussed about the planning module, earlier on, and there are a couple of you that I'm going to send my template across to. But it's about taking small steps. It's not about doing everything all in one go. It's about bit by bit by bit, one email, one post, one call, one video, small steps, not all in one shot, bit by bit by bit by bit. And it's about testing it. It's about seeing whether it works or not. So, what does that mean? So therefore, that means you have certain, you think to yourself, right, okay, I'm going to send out a customer email. Okay, fine, right. I've worked out what I'm going to put in it, and I understand what I've got to do, and it's got to be written in the right way, and I've got a whole timeline about when I'm going to put my content together and proof it all and make sure it works. Okay, so I've got everyone's customer emails that they're okay to get the emails. Okay, fine, I've got all of that. Right, I'm going to send my email out to the first 50 customers in my database. Okay, so I want to see out of those 50, what's the open rate like? What's the click-through rate? Okay, so I've noticed that I did one certain style, that worked well, the other style didn't. So therefore you refine. You refine what the activities are, you refine what the things to do. You may find there are certain things that you're really good at doing, and there are other things that you're not so good at doing. And then it's about the measurement. That's what you have to do. Is it working? It is working. It isn't working. Go back, do again, reiterate, reiterate, and that's all part of the building process. So this actually is really a summary overall. Okay, so we've covered quite a lot of ground across quite a lot of different areas, and really in terms of takeaway advice for you, the first thing I'd start with is saying assess the current situation. I'm sure you've done that and you continue to do that, but the situation is changing all the time, so therefore clearly the assessment changes all the time. But by that I mean, you know, where is my business? What is the cash flow situation of my business? What's what we would describe it as the runway? You know, you've got to know what that is. However painful that might be, you need to know that. You need to be mindful of it. What is on offer in terms of government support, and how do I get that support? Where am I as far as that support's concerned, etc., etc. And also, where am I at with my customers? How many of my customers are actually live? How many customers have dropped away? I have a friend of mine who's a gardener, and he has a certain number of customers, and then when the whole virus hit, there were a number of them who immediately turned around and said, look, you know, we're now at home, so as much as we'd be very happy for you to come and do our garden, we don't need you to do that. We can do that ourselves. So immediately that was stopped, and some of them turned around and said, look, you know, stop it at the moment, but that doesn't mean that we want to stop permanently. We just want to kind of put that on hold for a few months, and then let's review the situation in 3 months' time. So that's all part of the assessment of that current situation. Then we obviously get to the whole segmentation issue, where we segment our different customers. You know, there may be some who, as far as they're concerned, it's great, it's business as usual, we're very happy to carry on, and it works absolutely fine. There might be others who turn around and say, right, we want to take a break. So those guys that are in the take a break category, don't start necessarily marketing to them about, you know, what the new product is, what the new offer is, what's going on. Those are the guys that you need to check back in and go, how's everything going? Hope everything's going okay. Hope everybody's well. I mean, in the garden situation, that would be a great example of somebody to go, okay, look, you know, here's some gardening tips. Here's how to make it work. Obviously, I'm the master gardener by way of example, okay? But it's about knowing what your, you know, what your segments are and where those segments fit, and being really, really critical and really, you know, be exhaustive about that. Be really mindful about it. Really think about it carefully. And then the next thing to be mindful of is the changes. What's gone on in the marketplace? The fact that, you know, events in person are not going to happen. Travel, at least for a while, is not going to happen in the conventional way. So therefore, we have to think about it. You know, those are the important things to bear in mind. I'm going to get to Git's question. So there was a really good question here about customers' wants, and should we be more concerned about what they need? Okay, so maybe I didn't explain that point fully before, but there are needs tend to be absolute things that a customer may need. We need food, we need water, we need security, we need safety, we need to feel valued. Those are things that we need in a general sense. What a customer wants is what they are looking for us to fulfill in terms of the things that they are after. So I may have a need for something and I might want that need to be met in a certain way. So it's kind of the need comes first and then followed by the want. In terms of what it is that your business should focus on, it's clearly the customer want, because the customer wants a product at a certain price to do a certain thing in a certain way. And you can kind of work that one through. But maybe I didn't necessarily explain that clearly at the time, but hopefully that clears that up for you, Gita. Oh, went back the wrong way. So just to kind of take you through some of the other points which we discussed already, but really kind of summarizing the whole flow of everything through. You need to be mindful of the changes in terms of how things are changing, how customers want to interact. Are they happy to use a chatbot? Are they happy in terms of pricing plans and subscriptions, those sorts of things? And then let's remember the fact that customer engagement, that in itself is about connecting with the customer. Yeah, you are connected already, but the truth is you cannot, going back to that third slide of, in our business, the customer is king. You cannot underscore the importance of being connected to your customer and understanding your customer and working that through, because ultimately that is going to give you continued loyalty if they're already an existing customer, and if they're not an existing customer, it will start to engender loyalty. I don't know how many of you have had this experience of now looking to source things locally rather than further afield, because there's a feeling that you feel better about the fact it's somebody local that you're supporting, who's in a similar situation to you. But loyalty is the key. That is obviously what you're aiming towards, and it's something that you need to build, and you should never assume it's always going to be there. Yes, there are certain situations where, what a customer wants and what you're trying to deliver just doesn't work. But it's about working that through. And then obviously, as we've spoken about a fair bit about planning, and yes, no problem, Paul, I will send you the template across. It's about having a plan. It's about implementing the plan. It's about measuring it, and it's about reviewing. That sounds obvious, but when we're caught up in the maelstrom of everything, it's very, very difficult sometimes to do that. So sometimes it pays just to sort of step back, and that's what you've done. You've done this morning by investing the time to listen to the presentation, which I hope has been of value, so that you can actually step back and think this through and try and figure this out. There have been many a business that has the phrase is pivoting. When a business pivots and it changes its direction in terms of what it does. There's been many a business that have been forced to do so, not because they wanted to do so, but because the situation has changed in such a way. So in those instances, you've got to try and figure it through and work it through. But the way to do that is the whole planning piece. Doesn't sound too exciting, but how many times have we woken up in the morning and have just gone, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how it's going to work. It might sound a bit crazy, but for me personally, I love a good to-do list. So I can actually look through my to-do list and work it through, and crossing each of those things off gives me, it makes me feel like I've done things. But if you've got that within the context of a plan, and you can start to see the measurements of things, then you get that feeling of, you know what, we're actually getting somewhere here. We're actually moving the needle. I'm actually taking control of the situation, which is challenging for everybody, but I'm being able to do that, and then obviously repeat that. So timing wise, we're probably a little bit ahead, but wasn't quite sure how the timings would work in terms of the materials coming through. You've got my contact details there, in terms of my email and my number, and obviously you can connect to me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to do so. I hope that has been of use to you. I mean, I think the most, Geeta, if you don't mind me just kind of addressing the area that you're working on. You're in a challenging area, particularly on the area of recruitment, because right now people are not hiring, or if they're, unfortunately in certain instances it's the reverse. And also you're talking about helping overseas companies set up a presence in the UK again, and finding them partners too. So I think my advice to you specifically is, when you're talking about office costs as well, which again is another interesting discussion. I guess the office might be a virtual office rather than a real one. I guess it's really a case of, and this is actually something that I'm finding myself is within my own network, the value of my network and the value of talking to people within my network and the value of talking to my existing customers to understand what their situation is, how they are progressing with things, what the conversations they're having with people. So I would obviously counsel the same thing, which you've probably done, and then just to work out what the, where are the options and where are the opportunities, and where are the, as it were, quick wins where you can demonstrate very quick value and very quick success wherever they may be. Right now, particularly within where we're at the moment with all of the government support and all the different things on offer, there are lots of different things out there on offer, which it's about navigating what they are, how they work, what your eligibility is for them, applying for them, not you personally, but clients that maybe you advise. So I'm hoping that helps you in some way, given what you've put through. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them through. I'll be quiet for a bit and just see it as they come through. Okay, but feel free to drop me an email, drop me a line. I will obviously follow up in terms of the templates, and likewise feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you, Mark. I don't think I can see any questions coming through, so I think we're just gonna bring the webinar to an end now. Obviously, we'll be sending the presentations and the recording to everyone who attended within the next 24 hours, and so you'll have Mark's contact details on there. So if you've got anything you want to ask him, I'm sure you're okay with them contacting you, yeah?
Absolutely, no problem at all. No problem at all.
Great. Well, yeah, anyways, thanks everyone. Thank you, Mark, for today. Thank you, Marta, at the beginning as well. And yeah, as mentioned, we'll be in touch with the recording and the webinar very shortly.